Cardiff. But Jamie's special birthday treat was impossible.
And I said, I'm incredible. I was just amazed because I said, you do run trains to Cardiff? He said, yes, but there's no direct train. The only way you could really get there is go via London on a Great Western train. And I said, that's 7 hour journey. He said, yes, there's no direct route.
A train ride through the southwest is one of the great railway journeys of the world, one of the engineering glories of the Victorian age. It's now up for sale. It's to be the first route to invite in new private owners. Success or failure, we'll be the first to know. All change indeed. Along the sea wall through Dawlish and Teignmouth, and then across the Albert Bridge, the trip west was a breathtaking, if meandering, experience for travellers. It was a huge engineering project. Although built on the cheap, initially with treacherous timber viaducts, it almost bankrupted its private backers. But in 1867, West Cornwall, which had had some of the first ever rail lines, welcomed its first London train.
The railway age actually began here in Cornwall. Behind me stands Richard Trevithick. It was his experience from the tin industry that meant he was able to develop the first steam engine to run on rails, 20 years before Stephenson's first locomotive.
130 years later, it's weeds and low speed. 1995 has been a troubled year for local railways as BR split itself up into separate companies and introduced market forces preparing for privatisation. Memories of a cosy world of sleepy branch lines have been clouded by a year of headline dramas. Free-market forces have been felt in all aspects of the railway industry. It began with freight. Thousands of tons of English China Clays continental traffic had to be switched to the roads because of a price rise. The sleeper service from Plymouth to Scotland was laid to rest. It was cheaper to send an engine by road, and prices were put up to keep school children off the trains.
The government could have sold the railways off as one big company, British Rail Incorporated. It didn't. It decided to split the whole network up into dozens of little companies. So for everything that's fixed, the buildings, the bridges, the platforms, the sleepers, the tracks, the signals, they're all going to be owned by just one company, Railtrack. That's going to be sold off next year. However, the trains are a different matter altogether. They're owned by Roscoe's, rolling stock companies. There are 3 of them, and they're going to lease out their trains to companies that will actually provide us with the services, train operating units. There are going to be 25 in the country as a whole, 4 in the southwest. The first to be sold off is Great Western Intercity. That runs the intercity trains from Penzance, Exeter and Taunton up to Paddington. The next franchise to be sold off is South West Trains. Now that's for people who want to take the journey from Exeter to Waterloo. Then if you want to go to the north of England, what about intercity cross-country? And finally, for your branch lines, there's regional railways, South Wales and West. And all these companies are going to be operating on the same tracks, using the same stations, and sometimes on the same routes.
You can see how it works by taking a trip to Exeter, St David's. I follow the comings and goings over a half-hour period in the middle of the day. Knowing who to complain to if something goes wrong demands an intimate knowledge of the timetable.
The passengers just leaving here are off to Waterloo, not Paddington. So that must mean that this particular train is run by South West Trains. The train now leaving platform 4 here is on its way down to Plymouth. This one is intercity cross-country. It's just come from Liverpool. If you've actually missed the train going down to Plymouth from intercity cross-country, all you have to do is wait a few minutes and another one comes down going down to Plymouth. Of course, this time it's run by Great Western Intercity, another company altogether. And the train that's just come in front of us is from Regional Railways, South Wales and West.
Many rail workers have taken their redundancy money and fled. Life as a passenger is preferable to working in the semi-privatised industry.
It wasn't a happy place to work, I tell you, from the last few months. But nobody knew what to do, whether to stay or go or what to do. Everybody's scratching their heads. We were worried to death, really. We lost all the station work. I mean, everything was all out to subcontractors, and so there was hardly any work left at all. That's basically why I left, because in the end, there was not going to be any work in a minute. Let's get out while I can, take the money and run.
Many still managing the railways are even more unhappy, but are unable to speak openly. One manager, represented here by an actor, told us of a year in which he'd often been ashamed of what he'd been forced to do to passengers.
Well, during the last 12 to 18 months, we've had a complete rundown of staff in some stations. Where we've always had 2 staff, we've now got only 1. Well, that affects passengers greatly. There's no one there before 9 or after 5. In fact, no one's really made aware if the train's cancelled or not.
So there have been a lot of cancellations then?
Well, we've had more cancellations than I can ever remember. We're badly hit by cancelling commuter trains in the morning, busy commuter trains, in fact. So it's not unusual to have a group of people at Starcross Station, for example, waiting an hour because the train's cancelled and no one's been able to tell them because there's no tannoy system or anything down there. So we're running the stock into the ground. We've got to get the maintenance done as quickly as possible in the rolling stock to be able to continue with it in service. It was the wear and tear that these trains are now getting. It seems to me as if we can't get any extra coaches. So in a hot summer like we had in 1995, we're having trains full and standing people are being left behind because there's simply no room for them.
And so how do you feel about that then?
Well, we as ordinary railmen feel very disgusted. It never used to be like that. The pride and joy always used to be the seaside resorts. Trains full, but you always had the coaches. Before the thought of privatisation came in, we used to be able to run additional trains if the volume of people travelling from A to B was high. Now you've got to go through the procedure of informing Railtrack weeks in advance. Whereas in the olden days, the station inspector, if he had a crew and rolling stock there, he could arrange to run a special service. All he had to do was inform the signalman.
Regional railways agreed staffing had been cut, but said it was a choice of fewer staff or fewer trains. It was hoped outside funding would solve the information problem. They also agreed about the rolling stock problems. But in what they described as a brave new world, they hoped they could work with Railtrack to agree to allow more trains more quickly. Let's forget 1995's problems for a moment. It is, after all, a beautiful line. West of Exeter, it sweeps along the coast. It may be slow, but GWR, the Great Way Round, offered a startling view. Its social impact can still be seen. Towns grew up catering for the hordes of city dwellers who suddenly had access to the sea. The train gave birth to the holiday maker. Today, those holidaymakers are troublesome peaks in demand for business short of extra trains. Business travellers wonder why it takes so long to get to Plymouth. Brunel had been forced to take the Great Way Round because he didn't have enough money to cross Dartmoor, a costly legacy for a new private owner. Storms and crumbling cliffs have made it a nightmare to keep open. Curbing lines prevent faster trains. Brunel didn't have the money during the great railway age, and there are doubts whether future entrepreneurs could do any better, especially as they'd only have 7 years to see a return.
If the public are going to judge how successful is franchising, how successful is the railway privatised, one of the things they're going to look at above all else is new trains, new investment. That's the thing they're going to see. The trains will still be totally safe, they'll run on time, and all those things will go on, but they want to see new trains. You can't do new trains on a 7-year, you can do investment on a 12-year.
With no prospect of investment, sea containers pulled out. And Bill Bradshaw, a former boss of the West's railways, sees little hope for those left, given that the financial guarantees are for the firms renting out track and trains, not those providing services to the customer.
The track access charges have been fixed, and every train operating company has been forced to sign an agreement saying they will pay these charges for the duration of the franchise. They've been fixed at a level which will make rail track profitable, so that rail track can be floated. They have not been fixed with the idea of encouraging lots of extra people to come along and run trains.
Paying these access charges means running trains absorb hundreds of millions of pounds extra of taxpayers' money. At least rail track will make a profit and be attractive to shareholders, but no one can make a profit running trains without subsidy. It's made many services in the southwest even more uneconomic. Roger Salmon, the franchising director, now has to force bidders to offer a minimum service. This is a passenger service requirement, but this minimum is well below the current timetable and is in the midst of being challenged in the courts by rail supporters. And it's behind Opera's closed doors that the subsidy bargains are being struck. Cost-cutting isn't easy, given so much money has to go to Railtrack and the Roscoes. The alternative is cutting loss-making services. In the end, the final bidders didn't include the likes of Richard Branson or Sea Containers. Even the bid by the existing management of Great Western Intercity was rejected in favour of a group calling itself Resurgent. More ex-BR managers. City analysts saw little hope of big financial backing. Government secrecy forced all the bidders to say nothing about what they're planning, and facts about Resurgence were hard to come by. What we do know, though, is that the head of the firm, Mike Jones, has strong political leanings, seen here representing the Prime Minister's own constituency.
I think the great problem with all the bidders is, do they have sufficient capital resources to be able to invest money in providing a better railway? And I have some doubts as to whether they have the resources behind them to do that. One of the things the government held out at the beginning of the railway privatisation process was we were going to see the private sector coming in and bringing capital. And my worry about Resurgence Railways is, have they enough resources to come in and do a better job saving the management buyout?
Only last night the government said money wasn't a problem.
The train operating companies don't need to have vast capital resources because they're not going to own their own rolling stock. I don't accept that it is necessary to have a longer franchise period than 7 years in order for the new private sector companies to establish themselves and to develop their businesses in the interest of their customers. That would only be necessary if we were requiring them to raise the capital and to invest in rolling stock with a 30 or 40-year life. And that isn't the way that it's being structured. We have quite deliberately put that responsibility with Roscoe's, which can take a long-term view because they are long-term businesses.
Today, Resurgence's bid was turned down because of a lack of money, and rejected a fortnight ago. Great Western's present managers are once again front runners, and all hopes of a November announcement have failed. Whoever wins, this is the prize. The best hope of privatised profit is to attract more first-class travel. More people like these are wanted on the trains. There are no student rail cards here, no super savers. First-class travel brings in up to 5 times more per passenger than standard class. More comfortable than driving, cheaper than flying. The first year of trying to run as a private business aimed to expand this lucrative trade. But one well-known traveller wasn't impressed with the new shadow franchise.
There is no doubt that the quality and the quantity of the service have both deteriorated recently. And that happened when they started to operate this as what they call a shadow franchise. Just over a year ago. In other words, they operated it as if it were in the private sector. And in the private sector, as sure as night follows day, the service is geared towards the shareholder as well as the customer, and in some cases instead of the customer. So what happened? Fewer trains and more people on those trains. And in the summer, last summer, this service on many days was a total disgrace. The trains were desperately overcrowded. People were travelling from Penzance to London and vice versa, standing for 4.5 hours. They couldn't find a seat. Absolutely shambolic. So if that's what privatisation is all about, the longer they delay it, the better. It would be a matter of great regret to me if, for whatever reason, I was unable to do it, or if the service itself came to an end. And I think there is a real threat that it will come to an end. Whatever they say, happens eventually, they will claim economic reasons.
Possibly some scope for improvement then. But if a private operator wants to expand the business, they're going to need trains. Leasing more trains means someone has to buy them. It's expected it'll be the train operators who bear this burden, not the leasing company. Getting that money back in 7 years will be tough, if not impossible. The other alternative is to try to cut out loss-making services. Neither option is attractive.
You have to have a sufficiently frequent train service for people to get something like the convenience they have when they use a private car. When you want to go somewhere by car, you go at the time you're ready. If there's only one train every couple of hours, that doesn't compete very well. So you want a pretty frequent train service. I think if there were lower train fares, and if there were a more frequent service, a lot more people would use the train. It wouldn't raise the track costs at all, but of course you would need more rolling stock. There isn't the rolling stock. There isn't the rolling stock to do it. So even if a company came along and said, look, we want to double the number of people using the train out of Paddington, and I believe that is entirely possible, they would immediately run up against the problem of there being no rolling stock. And of course you've also got rail trains. If you ran twice as many trains as happens now, the track cost would hardly vary at all. But if rail track said we want twice as much in track access charges, they would kill the business stone dead. So you need to get several parties to agree on a particular policy. If any of them says, well, we're not going to join, we demand more than our share of any extra, then the whole policy is killed.
Beyond intercity, a deeper problem, the branch line. Even in 1903, the railway's heyday, reports were written about the losses they made. Devon and Cornwall was once thick with rail track. In the 50s, you could jaunt up to Dartmoor on a line to Yelverton. "40 years on, the trees may have grown up a bit more, but beyond that, very little has actually changed around here. That is, apart from the branch line. It's disappeared. There's no halt at Burrator and Sheepstore anymore. All that can be found are a few steps that don't lead anywhere, and the occasional lone scooter. The question now is, how many of the southwest branch lines are going to follow the same route? Rail closures have been going on for 50 years. Now, for the first time, the passenger service requirement will offer a guaranteed number of trains and ensure lines continue. But even so, some are unconvinced that a system based on profit will have a long-term commitment to lines that have fallen this far. As I walked down the Newquay platform with local MP Paul Tyler, the 10:15 passed us, the first train of the day.
Is absolutely useless if you're trying to get to work, or indeed students getting down to college at St Oswald. I'm afraid that's symptomatic of the whole system. We're only allowed a train when it isn't useful somewhere else. During the summer in Newquay, about half the services never seemed to run, and travelling had to be on the road. And that was, of course, not because anything was wrong with the line here or anything wrong with the rolling stock. The rolling stock had been taken somewhere else, the supply was not available, the investment in new rolling stock was not coming through because of the threat of privatisation. So effectively, people were being forced off rail by privatisation. Yes, I mean, we've had that first year, but what are your constituents saying? What are they saying is actually happening on the track in this especially over a year? What are the problems been? I think passengers are most concerned about confusion. But something in the region of £500 million has gone to merchant bankers and lawyers. And all the people who are going to obviously do very well from the incredible legal complexity of this system. They're going to be something like 94, 95 different companies. The jigsaw is immense. And so these people are going to do very well at it. But imagine what we could have done with those millions in improving the track. What we're seeing at the moment is that privatization is disintegrating the whole rail network. And eventually that must mean that far-flung parts of the British Isles won't have a mainline service, a network at all.
The passenger service requirement provides guarantees of levels of service which have never been there before. The publicly owned, publicly accountable British Rail has the power to vary fares or to vary the levels of service without any control at all. On levels of service, the only thing it can't do is to close down a service completely, but it can meet its current statutory obligations by running one train a week in one direction. If it does that, it doesn't need to go through closure procedures, whereas the privatized franchise operators will have a contract with the franchising director based upon the passenger service requirement, and they will have a legal obligation to provide the services that are specified.
The battle for branch lines will not be solved by privatization. Whoever runs them, most of the money will come from taxpayers. It'll be politics, not economics, that keeps them going. The PSR means Westminster will play an even more crucial role in protecting services. Leaving the Commons, St Ives MP David Harris hurries back to his constituency. He believes it was pressure from MPs such as himself that saved his sleeper service to Cornwall.
I am absolutely convinced that it was virtually on the point of closure just about, I suppose, about 2 years ago. And I have no doubt at all the thing that saved it was actually the whole business of franchising, privatization. Because, of course, the franchise director made it a condition of the franchise that we let that they maintain the sleeper for the period of the franchise, which would presumably be about 7 years. And that's the greatest security we've ever had on this service.
But do you have any qualms about privatization? Because it's a very big and very complicated piece of legislation.
Oh, yes, of course I must have qualms about the details. I don't have any qualms about the principle, because, quite frankly, I don't see, particularly in the current economic climate, how any government could guarantee the money which British Rail needs for its capital programme. Private finance is absolutely essential.
However, a similar service has disappeared. The last passengers to ride on the sleeper service between Plymouth and Scotland rode north this spring. One problem about such a cutback is what do you do with the train? Built for £1 million, this carriage ended up in Bodmin. Peter Fitzgerald, a lighting manufacturer, bought it for around £3,000. It's one use for his railhead. He certainly can't use it to export his goods anymore. There's only one freight train he could join, and that is full.
We have said that we would like to join as soon as it's possible. Transrail are not able to offer the capacity on the service at this moment. But I think this argument is not just for us, it is for other companies in Cornwall. And if you want a viable rail service in Cornwall, it has to be a service which is open to companies who cannot fill complete trains. To gain an extra train, they have to sell 80% of the train to make it worthwhile.
Nearby in St Austell, English China Clays still has access to the main line. They're content with local freight services and shift more than 1 million tonnes a year by rail to Foy. But outside the ECC empire in Cornwall, high charges from Railtrack are blamed for forcing thousands of tonnes of freight bound for the continent onto the roads.
12 months ago, we sent tens of thousands of tonnes of freight to the continent by rail. That has been significantly reduced, particularly for bag traffic, because the rail charges went up quite considerably.
investment to such a degree that we switched to using roads. And when you consider one lorry is 25 tons, that's a lot of extra road traffic. You'd rather be moving it by rail. We would, all things being equal, we'd rather move it by rail, but when the pricing is so high, if we charge that to our customer, we'd have lost the business in Belgium or France or wherever. So we just couldn't accept those high charges. So we had to look for a less costly way of moving the bag. And also, a year ago, we had 2 trains of bulk cargo going to the continent. One went to Italy, and the other went to Switzerland. The Swiss traffic is now stopped because we find it's cheaper to move it by sea to Antwerp, and then by rail from Antwerp to Switzerland. Cheaper than rail directly from Bournemouth.
Sending freight to Europe may be a problem, but passengers wanting to take the train from the southwest to the continent should have a happier time of it. This is the future of train travel, Eurostar, unashamed luxury. Penzance has a connection to it in Waterloo. Plymouth will next year have its own Eurostar Direct. Of course, there's no electric line, so they're having to build a diesel version to make the long journey southwest. When it comes, it will be a daily reminder of what rail investment can do. But for the rest of the system, well, during the great railway age of the last century, the cost of building Devon and Cornwall's main line almost bankrupted its private backers. Now, private owners are back, and we'll be the first to find out if investing and running the railways is any easier for them second time around.
Please visit our website for news about new productions that are on the way, and you can support my work on my Patreon page. Thank you.